Hey there, you're listening to the Jazz Central Studios podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jazz Central Studios podcast. My name is Sam Worthington and I'm your host. Today we have a special guest. He's a composer, a band leader, a master saxophonist, a great teacher, a respected pedagogue, and a well-loved man across this Twin Cities metro region. Yes, it's the great one. Pete Whitman joins us today. Pete, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Sam. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for stopping by. So you're playing this Saturday, 8 o'clock at Jazz Central. Very exciting, very cool. Tell us who's in the band. Tell us who we're going to hear.
All right. Well, that's with Phil Hay on drums, Joe Strand on piano, and Ted Olson on bass.
God damn, that's a swinging lineup. Phil Hay, what can you say? He's one of the masters. How long have you been playing with Phil?
I've probably played with Phil longer than anyone else in town. You know, since I started playing with Phil, around 1990.
Wow.
And we used to go to his place and rehearse with various bands. With Bill Simonson had a quintet in those days, and we were in a band together called Departure Point. And he was also the drummer in a group I had called the Xtet, which played at the Old Artist Quarter for about 12 years, one Thursday a month.
And Phil obviously has mastered rhythmic conception, but one of the things about your playing that I've always appreciated is your rhythmic command. Almost reminds me of Cannonball Adderley. You know how Cannonball Adderley, like he'd have a great rhythm section, they'd play great time, and then he'd say, no, this is great time. This is where it is. You play that way, you command that way. How often do you think about that rhythmic command in your playing, or has it been more of a natural thing for you?
When you're playing, you don't want to think too much because that screws you up, you know, but it's certainly something I'm always concerning myself with. It's a priority. When I listen to some of my recordings, I'm kind of like I'm kind of cringing at moments of where I'm hearing myself kind of losing it, and always glad when I feel like, oh yeah, that was right on. That felt great, you know. So it's certainly a priority of mine. I think, a lot of the rhythm section players I play with, they're some of my best teachers, you know, whether it's the drummers, the piano players, the bass players, the guitar players. I certainly, Phil, Bobby Peterson, and Kevin Washington and Jeff Bailey are, I think, some of my best teachers, and certainly also Andres Prado. But they were always not necessarily what they told you, but just by the way they would play, you want to somehow, you know, complement what they're doing as much as possible, and that forces you to really start thinking more rhythmically.
Well, that, Pete, is a humble response from a humble man. But let's give our audience a little taste of what I'm talking about here. Here's a cutoff of the Chris Olson and Pete Whitman Quintet's album entitled Changes We Can Believe In, and the tune Life After, in which Pete Whitman cuts it up mathematically and lays it down like a railroad track.
It's like Monk and Ornette are kind of be yourself, you and whatever happens, happens. It's
Make you
right.
feel good.
Yeah, it's right. You be yourself, and don't try to force other things that aren't natural.
So looking forward to your show on Saturday, Pete. So I heard there was a rumor that you might be playing a tune off of Changes We Can Believe In, the record with you and Chris Olsen. But what else are you going to be playing?
We're not really rehearsing much for that.
Perfect.
And that's right, because those guys are all great players, and they all kind of reflect kind of an aesthetic of the music that I love. And so I just kind of picked tunes that I thought would complement them and complement myself. So rhythm-ing some Monk, let's see, Body and Soul. We're doing some Ornette, like Round Trip and Law Years.
Wow.
And let's see. Phil and I used to do a tribute to Dewey Redman and Ornette Coleman.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it was with the first version was with Gordie Johnson and Bill Carruthers, and that was in the early mid 2000s. And then we did it with Brian Nichols.
Wow, that is so hip.
And that was a super fun group. And so whenever I play with Phil, I always, try to grab some Ornette or Dewey Redman or some stuff from that kind of style and play it with him, because he's such a master of that bag.
Isn't there something about our Twin Cities scene here where we put together sets, and maybe there's some Monk, maybe there's some Mingus, maybe there's some Coltrane, but then we sprinkle in this, I don't know what you call it, avant-garde, outside music, time no changes. But isn't that, there's something here in the water, there's something here in the Twin Cities where that seems to be a common practice.
Well, I think amongst a lot of the kind of musical mentors, in the area, the jazz mentors, it seems like, Ornette and his collaborators are really appreciated, and their influence is revered, and so their music is often performed and in all kinds of different kind of approaches, kind of a tribute to the way they might have played it, or a very unique approach.
Now, do you think as a teacher, if someone's really into like Dexter Gordon, Cannonball Adderley, Sonny Stitt, real masters of straight ahead jazz, do you think there's a benefit for them to check out some of that Wile E. Coyote outside stuff? I mean, is there a way in which that can possibly open up like a straight ahead perspective?
Oh, absolutely.
How so?
Ornette, for example, had memorized all kinds of Charlie Parker solos and came really out of Charlie Parker a great deal. But the thing is, if you just regurgitate the same licks that your heroes played, in the moment, you need to play something else. You need to play, what's right for the moment. And I totally, when I teach, I want my students to imitate people they admire. It's how you learn. It's like learning a language. It's like learning how to talk from your parents, And to me, it's an organic way of learning. But once you start playing with other people and you're collaborating, and it's a unique moment. It's a unique collaboration. So unique stuff should happen. So even though you may be inspired to play like Dexter Gordon or Freddie Hubbard or whoever, what's happening right when you guys are playing, that's special. And there's nothing else going to be like it. And you just got to open yourself to whatever that is. And to me, I think my favorite part of music is the collaboration, And I used to be much more rigid. I want to sound like this. My two big heroes coming up were probably Joe Henderson and Jan Gabarek.
Wow.
Which are very kind of different approaches.
that makes a lot of sense.
And Joe Henderson, I remember being 15, sitting in a car and hearing them both back to back on the radio, and first hearing, I think it was Joe Henderson. I think he was on an album with Patrice Rushen, and going, wow, what a sound, what a feel. I want to sound like that, you know, as a young saxophonist. And then hearing Jan Gabarek playing with Keith Jarrett on Belonging and go, oh, wow, that sounds amazing. They're very different players.
Right.
And so for a good part of my early life, I was always trying to recreate one or the other. And then I realized, forget that. You are who you are.
Whoa.
Just play.
Now, that makes a lot of sense, Pete, because when you play soprano or E-flat saxophone, or when you're in those higher registers and you're lyrical with your melodies, Sound of Water in the Mississippi, which, you know, we could, if you're a lucky audience, you'll hear a sample. But when you're playing that lyrical way, it is haunting, and it's like I've heard it before, or I've heard something like it, and to hear you say Gabarek as an influence, that's really beautiful and magical to me, because there's a special lyrical thing, especially in those higher registers, that he did that no one else was doing, that I appreciate to know that is kind of part of your musical development. But when you're playing really lyrical like that, there's still rhythm as opposed to the hard driving rhythmic abilities I mentioned before. But when you're playing really lyrical like that, are you thinking of him? Are you thinking of the Europeans?
Oh no, not anymore.
Yeah.
There was a time I probably would have been. Yeah. Now in soprano, it's
like
interesting.
In a dreamy snow globe, and
it's funny. It's sometimes on soprano.
Yeah.
It's like I have influences, but I don't. You know, certainly there was Gabarek and there's Wayne Shorter and there's Liebman and all those. But I realized when I started playing a lot of soprano, and I did that probably with Andres Prado, and his stuff was all, you know, a lot of very Latin, you know, Peruvian, Afro-Peruvian influenced. I realized I had no model that I wanted to play like when I was playing like that. And it was very freeing. And also, it was kind of like, you know, with tenor, I'm always constantly like sweating, you know, my mouthpiece and my sound. I'm just so hyper picky.
Kicking everybody's ass on the bandstand. It's hard work.
and then at soprano, I'd like, yeah, this works. This is fine. You know, and in some ways, I think I sound better on soprano because I'm not so anal about it. I'm just kind of whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then you've recorded in these highly lyrical. You put yourselves in these highly lyrical compositions on the soprano, and it just works. It's just really nice. So enough of a tease. Here's Pete Whitman on "Sound of Water." Seen a lot of changes in the Twin Cities scene. You've been here for a while.
Yeah.
You've seen it go through a lot. If you had to describe some things that characterize us, some things that stay the same, some sort of cultural identifiers of our scene over all the years you've been involved, what would be those things? Who are we? If you had to say, what is our DNA here? Well,
you know, one of the things I didn't realize growing up in Minnesota was how segregated it was. You know, as a white guy living in kind of the bubble, you know. And then as I got older, I started realizing, wow, there's not a lot of collaboration in the jazz community, let's say, between white musicians and musicians of color. It was kind of segregated. And then as I started playing with different players, I started to see there was at least a consciousness. Musicians weren't as in denial of this. There's been some stuff on Facebook by some younger players that have brought this, and some of them gotten criticism. But I think it's something that's we should be aware of, that the Minnesota culture, even the jazz culture, which is an African American music, is kind of still segregated, but it's evolving. I think there's more and more collaboration. There's more between all kinds of musicians, both from different races and different backgrounds. And I think the beautiful thing about jazz is it excites people about what they can learn from different cultures and what they can gain from it, how they can enhance their own music. And so I think there is a lot more collaboration from all kinds of people from different backgrounds. But so I would say one of the more significant ways it's changed, but it's still got a lot more growth, is it went from being, I had, like in McNally Smith, I had young black students who would tell me that they grew up in the Twin Cities. They thought jazz was white music. And
wow.
Because that's how it was for them. And they, if you grow up and you're going to North High School and all the jazz you're hearing is all white musicians.
Yeah. And then you get the white musicians from the suburbs with socioeconomic and educational advantages.
Yeah. At college, you got all the rehearsal bands, and it's all people that, have got their music degrees and played in big bands in college, and they're good sight readers.
Yeah.
But the innovators are the ones that are not reading music. They're playing music by ear. They're playing probably in smaller groups, and they're the ones having the most influence on the music. And that's that's a whole cross section of musicians, but that's a reality that I think when I was younger, I really wasn't as aware of. I think that the pop music world in the Twin Cities was much more integrated and cross-collaborative than the jazz scene, which is totally weird on some levels. But this is not me. This is not a scientific observation. This is just my sense of what I'm seeing when I am out and playing. And but I think that's changing. I think the jazz scene is evolving and growing into a much more, I'm hoping so, much more cross pollinated cultural and racial, mix. But so there you go.
There's still work to do.
Yeah, there's work to do.
Well, this gets to my final question. And Pete, thanks so much for your time today. Do you have any hopes for the Twin Cities scene moving forward, moving into this post-pandemic era where there's so many great players, a great potential audience, venues that are coming together? Do you have any hopes for us?
Oh man, it's rocking. I hear so many amazing young musicians and people that are just so brilliant, and they're so pumped about music and collaboration and all kind. Yeah, I think music in the Twin Cities is amazing, and it's going to continue to grow. And I think I'm hopeful that it's a very positive. The musicians really drive the culture in the Twin Cities in a healthy, positive way, in different ways. In some ways, it's confronting our own problems and issues, and at the same time offering bridges, so we can cross these bridges and kind of come meet each other in our own common grounds, So, and that's a Dewey Redman tune, Walls or Bridges, and there was when I saw Dewey Redman with Phil Hay, by the way, right before they play it, he would go something like, walls or bridges, and he always goes bridges, and they would cut into the tune.
Well, Pete, it's a pleasure speaking to you today. Look forward to seeing you at Jazz Central on Saturday. And thank you for your time and what you do.
Thank you, Sam.
And thank you for listening to the Jazz Central Studios podcast. The Pete Whitman Quartet is playing at Jazz Central Saturday, April the 23rd at 8 p.m. You can't miss it. You gotta swing it. You gotta make it. Remember, Jazz Central Studios has limited seating, so please arrive early or late. Claim your ground, tune your ears, experience the night. You don't want to miss it. But if you can't make it in person, there's a live stream. There's a Jazz Central Studios live stream. It's super great. You can sit back, relax your dome, kick back in your own home, and check out this great band. Please consider donating to Jazz Central to keep this music, this scene, this venue, these people, this wonderful thing we got going on alive. I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.